recording them.
Great.
And this is Thomas Grant. We are here with Doug Hurling, the Vice President of Open Road Renewables, and he's going to answer some questions for us today that's hopefully going to dispel some rumors or facts that are already out in the public discussion that may not necessarily be accurate, and to answer our questions about some of the issues we would like to learn about concerning this solar farm project. So Doug, first, thank you for meeting with me.
Yeah, of course.
How long have you been with the Open Roads Renewable?
I've been with Open Road for, 7 years now, coming on,
Wow.
maybe it was just 8. Yeah, that's right.
So you've probably been involved with a lot of different projects over the years.
Yeah, I spent my entire career with Open Road working in Ohio, so developed a number of projects in the state.
So in your opinion, Doug, what's good about solar power?
What's good about solar? I mean, for me, coming from a background focused on the environment, certainly that using less fossil fuels and climate change, but for folks who are not on that side of things, there are a lot of other benefits, massive infusion of local tax dollars, jobs during construction and operation, what we call ecological services like reduced storm runoff and better water quality, new habitat for species. There's a lot of different reasons to like solar. Helps the grid by performing at peak energy usage hours. So there's a lot that we certainly like about it.
Okay, good. Thank you for the answer. And what's your vision for the future? And I'm not just talking about this specific project, but what's your vision for the future concerning where solar power can go from here?
Sure.
And how do you think that's going to affect people's energy costs in the future?
I see solar as part of the solution, not the solution. I don't think you're ever having a grid that's 100% solar power, nowhere near that. But I see solar as, complementary to gas and nuke and hydro and batteries as just something else that's helping keep the lights on and encourage more local economic development. That's where we kind of see it going.
And what drew your interest to pursue this area as a career?
Solar. I never thought I was a people person or anything, but really enjoy interacting with a wide variety of folks. Certainly get to meet with everyone under the sun, developing a solar project, but from interest in energy and an interest in just what it takes to put one of these projects together, I personally find that very rewarding and very interesting to do.
Thank you for that. Now, Grange Solar, this project, do you know roughly how many acres will this project cover?
Project should occupy about 3,000 acres in total.
Okay.
That's what we're calling kind of inside the fence.
3,000 acres. Now, what's the rough cost? I mean, you guys done cost analysis for building everything you're going to need? What, if you get the permits from OPSB and all that? Yeah,
construction should run about $500 million, maybe a bit more for a 500 megawatt solar project. That fluctuates 5 or 10% each year, either direction.
Now, does that cost all? Grange Solar, Open Roads Renewable, do you guys absorb that cost right now up front?
So for construction of these projects, you were certainly taking out financing from a bank. And for Grange Solar, Open Road Renewables is a developer project. So there will be a long-term owner that will own Grange Solar, construct it and operate it. So typically the owner is putting up some of the money, and then financing from a bank would handle the rest.
So there'll be no public funding used for the establishment of this?
No, these projects do receive what's called the investment tax credit. So after a few years of operation, they can receive up to a 30% tax credit on the capitalized costs of construction, but that's the only thing approaching that realm.
Okay. And roughly, what do you guys estimate the time? Like once it's approved, how long do you think until it would be an operational project?
After approval, and if there's been appeals to this Supreme Court of Ohio, construction can start within 6 to 12 months after that approval. Until the approval is in place, there's not usually a lot of spend on procurement of materials or final design until you know things are a go.
Okay. If you get the OPSB permit,
Sure.
What do you consider the direct benefits to the community? Like, are they going to get lower energy costs? What would be the estimated tax infused into the economy? And then I'm going to ask about jobs after that.
Yeah. In terms of energy costs, we can start there. As more solar goes on the grid and becomes a larger part of the energy portfolio, as a zero fuel cost resource, it drives down energy prices, but only when it's reached a certain level of penetration into the grid. So we wouldn't expect an immediate change in prices in a downward direction here from solar, but in terms of local benefit from tax dollars, a project like Grange, the best way to measure it is through what we call the pilot program. We don't know what a pilot will be passed here, but it's a good approximation just for the kind of pilot or not about how much money would flow in from the project. But about $180 million over a 40-year project life. That's $4.5 million per year. And we come to that number because we're paying under a pilot $9,000 per megawatt per year for the life of the project.
Okay.
And that goes to local taxing jurisdictions, just like your tax bill shows, schools taking X percent, like township this much. It's the same breakdown for a portion of that pilot. A portion goes directly to the county general fund too, for their discretion.
So, you're talking, I don't know if you know the percentages, but at least $1.5 million, $2 million a year locally for taxes, roughly?
Yeah, it's school districts typically get about 50% of that total.
Okay.
And then, townships usually have pretty low mill rates, but they get a significant portion as well. But the majority stays local, as opposed to going to the county for their discretion.
This is a substantial amount of money.
Yeah, no, it's real. It's about 35 or 40 times what folks are paying in CAUV taxes on the same ground now.
All right, now jobs, full-time jobs. Now, obviously, during construction and after it's built. What do what's your estimates if the plane goes off as you have it, in your head right now? How many jobs are you looking to create for the construction process, roughly?
During construction, it's usually, for projects this size, we expect about 500 full-time equivalent jobs during construction. That's, installers, heavy equipment operators, everything. There's always the indirect and induced jobs, kind of the trickle-down jobs for supporting industries and supply chain. We don't usually quantify those as much because that's more just kind of economic modeling. But in terms of long-term jobs, usually have about a dozen for the operation and maintenance of the project. That's your routine day-to-day monitoring of the project. A lot of those jobs, most of the jobs are on site. And then for this project with the dual-use grazing of the site, you have additional jobs for those folks handling the vegetation maintenance and keeping the sheep in line.
Okay, and we're going to touch base on that
sure.
later on, but that sounds great. And just on average, what do you think would be the average income of those full-time jobs?
Yeah.
Hold on, let me ask you another question. The construction process, are there going to be, is that going to be pushed to hire local, or are there actual crews that kind of roam around doing this kind of installation and process with these plants?
And I hope I'm using the term right, but there are always folks who are kind of the journeyman style who will maybe don't have a lot of attachments, will move around and work on jobs all around the state or around a region. But the goal is always to have as many local jobs as possible through this pilot program. If you want to do a pilot, and the county will let you do it, to really qualify and get it, you need to have at least 70% in-state labor. Okay. There's always a strong push for local, so you're not paying that per diem for folks to stay in a hotel or get lodging or drive 3 hours a day to make it. So there's always a strong push for local.
So that would be the same with the full-time jobs after it's built. Would be you want at least 70% of those jobs would be local or
you'd hope most of those jobs that you're on site every day for years that you're going to be that you're going to be local.
Okay, so
no reason they shouldn't be.
What would be the average income if you were just to assume? Let's talk about the 12 jobs roughly.
I was checking those actually today just to refresh myself, but for a site service technician on these projects, it's about $80,000 to $120,000 a year, depending on your level and expertise. That's pretty typical.
That's pretty good salary.
Construction might start as low as, for like someone who's fairly unskilled labor, around 35,000 per year, but that can go up to 80,000 or more depending on the level of expertise.
Okay. Now the OPSB, which is the Ohio Power Siting Board,
That's right.
the permit process, how does it go? How do you do that?
Sure. So where we are right now, we call kind of pre-permitting. We're preparing to submit an application in the September-October timeframe, and in order to submit an application, we need to open a docket with the Power Siting Board. That docket is where we submit all the parts of the application, where folks have a chance to submit comments, and it's just kind of the public-facing part of just every aspect of the project. Everything we create goes there and is available to the public. But in order to submit an application, we need to hold 2 public information meetings first. So we plan to hold those in the coming months. Those are usually poster board sessions. OPSB will be there manning a table to answer questions, but it's mostly us, our experts, talking, just letting folks kind of come around and ask questions about different aspects of the project. So there'll be 2 of those, and then submitting the application starts the clock. The Power Siting Board is composed of, or their staff is composed of experts in everything you can imagine, evaluating our ecological reports, geotech reports, archaeology, history, FAA, glare, you name it. All of that gets looked at with a fine-tooth comb over a 150-day review process.
Okay.
So that would take us probably to, if we submit an application in early October, that would take us to about February or March, when there'd be what we call a staff report from the staff, which shows their findings, then a public hearing, followed by an evidentiary hearing. Public hearing is where anyone who wants to gets 3 to 5 minutes to kind of say their piece about it, to testify for, against, neutral, to the judge presiding over the case.
Okay. So there will be an open public forum for people to give their perspective once it gets to that point.
Sure, and folks' comments along the way to the siting board through the docketing system essentially have the same effect as well.
Now Senate Bill 52, Ohio Senate Bill 52 was passed a couple years ago, and it kind of gave local governments the ability to preemptively ban solar. Now this process started prior to the Senate bill, so you guys are, from what I understand, you've been grandfathered in. Since from what I get, the local township trustees have established that they don't want solar farms in the area. Now, with that being said, I know I read Senate Bill 52, and in that one, there is required to be a vote, right? And now, with your effort, just to be clear, it doesn't require a vote. The people who are against it have the opportunity to go to the OPSB meeting and voice their concerns or post messages.
It's kind of a hybrid approach. We call it, the status of Grange is what we refer to as partially grandfathered. That might not be the term that OPSB uses, but the elements of kind of local control in determining whether the project gets approved or not would be a township trustee or their designee, or a commissioner or their designee are on the siting board for the vote. And while a local vote has no effect or bearing on the project, we're certainly focused on making sure that folks have the information about Grange and everything else. But this project started before, at a point early enough that it's not subject to all the elements of local control.
So how long are the leases with the property owners you're working with now? How many years are those for?
Sure. When we're talking about it, we will say kind of generally that, or like the leases are for 40 years. Leases and easements are for 40 years from when the project first flips the switch to when it would be decommissioned, or entering decommissioning would be up to 40 years. We have no ability to extend that without working with the landowner. It's got to be a bilateral decision to do that. That lease also includes years up front that we call the development term, typically about 6 or 7 years, along with a construction term. So the lease itself can end up being about 46, 48 years in total. If you include
So
that.
that 40 years counts once it's online and operational.
Exactly.
Okay. If a lease is broken, and I don't know, I'm sure you heard the solar project up in Toledo, they had to kind of fold up
Mm-hmm.
because from what I understand, there's supply chain issues with their solar panels. If you guys, for whatever reason, you go out of business, and by no means am I assuming that's going to happen, but is there a provision that you have to rehabilitate the land that you currently lease back to its original condition?
Yeah, it's a good question, and a question we get a lot, and an area for a lot of confusion. Every state does this differently, so if you're looking online, you might see what someone's talking about in Texas, but it has no bearing on how things are done in Ohio. Our leases, we cover decommissioning in two different areas. There's an obligation both from the state and from landowners that we are going to decommission the project at the end of 40 years, or when we choose to before that, if we're going to decommission earlier, and restore the land to its previous agricultural condition. That's ensuring that any drainage damage during decommissioning is brought back up, amending soil if need be, decompacting soils, and removing everything from the ground down to a level of 3 feet. And that's an area of misconception too, of, oh, you're just gonna cut everything off at 3 feet or something and leave that all out there. We do that because when we're driving posts in the ground, they can go 10 feet deep. And if something breaks off at 4 or 5 feet, the landowner doesn't want us digging a big hole to go find it. The name of the game here, from construction to decommissioning, is reducing ground disturbance and topsoil disturbance. But should the project, and getting back to your question, should the project go belly up for some reason, and there's not someone else who wants to step in and operate it, and it needs to be decommissioned, we're required, both in our leases and by the state, to hold or to fund a decommissioning bond that covers the full cost of returning the area to its pre-construction state.
Okay.
So that bond needs to be readjusted every 5 years by an engineer that's not part of our company. And then we can only add money to the bond, we can't take any out. The state holds that bond and would be, in that case, responsible should the company not be there to take care of the project getting reclaimed.
Okay. So there's pretty much like a third party that would come in and pretty much make sure everything is taken back to how it was prior.
Yeah.
You guys aren't going to be in charge of that.
And that's only in the case that that Grange Solar, for some reason, that someone was negligent, and that's why there's a bond as the backup.
Okay.
The primary plan is that the company who's there in charge is going to do that work themselves. But as a backstop, the state doesn't want someone to be able to just kind of wiggle out of it. So
Okay.
Posting that money to be there just in case.
There's protection for the public there.
Yeah, exactly. And the protection the state also does is limiting the amount of time that reclamation can take. They typically limit decommissioning to a year.
Okay. Now you mentioned just a few moments ago, it's a 40-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the hard end date? Like this is going to be 40 years operational, or do you think it's something that you may? I know it's hard to read into the future, but I guess some people are wondering: is this going to be a forever project, or is this going to end in 47 years, roughly, concerning the construction process?
Sure. Again, it comes up to the landowners. I think with the infrastructure here that we're going to, create, it would certainly make sense to have a project keep going in some form or fashion, whether it's the same size or a smaller one. But if landowners at that point decide, we're bean and corn, wheat, whatever you're growing at that point happens to be more attractive, then they'd be able to just trigger that reclamation clause and get out of it. So it's really hard to say, but that's why that flexibility is there.
Okay, so right now it's 40 years with the possibility more.
Yeah.
That's
I'd say it's a coin flip.
All up to the property owners if they want to read it.
Yep.
Okay. Now I did some research concerning solar farms.
Sure.
Protection. I got a few things listed here. Soil erosion. What is done to protect that?
Sure. I included some literature for you, but there's We focus on construction and post-construction stormwater management. In terms of post-construction, Ohio EPA has specific guidance for solar projects on how far apart panels need to be. We call that the disconnection. How you decompact and vegetate soils to make sure that stormwater your stormwater quantity, your runoff, is no greater than it is in the agricultural state. Ideally, a lot less, because you have year-round vegetation and undisturbed soils. During construction, like with any construction, you have silt fences, matting, other kind of barriers to reduce the chances of erosion. But what's very common on these projects now is, from the outset, putting down a cover crop or a cover that's going to hold the soil in place, so that you're not losing soil in a heavy rain event or anything like that.
Okay.
But we're bound, just like anyone, by Ohio EPA rules and everything else. Where if you have a lot of sediment flowing into a stream or anything else that's unusual, then you're on the hook for that.
Okay. Which runs right on my next question. The protection from runoff and sediment into water sources. So again, probably falls right into the Ohio EPA has guidelines that you guys will follow.
Yeah, and we have to set back a certain distance from those sources anyway. The setback area usually isn't something that's necessarily farmed. It ends up being a large filter strip, but I believe it's 100 feet, but I'd have to go check our documents. But it's a substantial distance from wetlands and waterways, just to provide that space to filter.
Okay. Groundwater contamination, is there any risk of that?
There's no risk of that from a solar project. No.
Okay. So, all those stories that we've heard I did look into that as well. I didn't find anything backing it up scientifically, independent research saying that there is any risk of that.
The main concern, I think where a lot of confusion lies on it, again, I have a little bit of literature in there for you, is there's a confusion about how a solar panel could be disposed, and the testing that goes on to make sure that it can be disposed in just a normal landfill, which also is rare that you'd be doing that at this point. But between how that testing is done versus what a solar panel is when it's operating in the field. To dispose of a solar panel, you test it by grinding it into very small pieces, exposing it to an acid bath to simulate landfill conditions of like the worst possible scenario of crushed up in acid, which is what a landfill condition could be like. Right. Out in the field, that's not the case. So it's a completely different situation, and that's where a lot of confusion is.
Okay. And what about wildlife safety? Is there any precautions that you guys can do for that?
Yeah, so and folks will see this when we submit the application in terms of our environmental studies, but as anyone knows who lives out here, you have bald eagles near the lake, and other avian species coming through. We have to set back a certain distance from bald eagle nests for the time of year that they are there. It's a short time of year that they're possibly not there. I think only a couple months, and it's about I believe a 660-foot setback, but I'd have to check. ODNR holds us to that. So there's a ton of protections for those species. We do our wildlife surveys for threatened and endangered species and just any species you're seeing out there. So there needs to be a plan in place to mitigate any possible incident. So that's a huge part of this. But yeah.
What about damage to the panels from wildlife? Is there anything you guys can do to kind of mitigate those risks?
We wouldn't expect much damage to panels from wildlife, just given the wildlife that would likely be inside the fence. We do have wildlife-friendly fencing so that most mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians can pass through no problem, because the fencing is like a woven wire fence, kind of like a deer fence.
Okay.
So we wouldn't expect any animals to be causing problems out there.
Okay.
I mean, squirrels can chew a wire, but we find that pretty quick.
Okay. Now, I was actually just talking to your associate here. You guys used to be in Lakeview, your location.
Yeah, we did.
So you guys saw firsthand the destruction of the tornado that happened March 14th. And I have seen a lot of concerns, like, weather-related damage with the tornado in mind. Are these particular panels rated to withstand a certain mile-per-hour wind conditions?
Yeah, when you're engineering the project, both the embedment of your pilings and the design of your racking are configured for what you'd expect the maximum winds to be in the area. And so that's, based on, meteorological data as far back as you have it, on storm events, everything else. Racking can be installed to withstand up to, I believe it's now 150 mile per hour gusts, or 3-second gusts, but can withstand lower wind speeds that are still very high for this area for a much longer time. In terms of hail or anything else, panels are designed to withstand hail, typically up to like ping pong to baseball or lacrosse ball size hail. If lacrosse ball is a reference point for anyone.
Wow, what is lacrosse ball? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, no, it's just some sport that some people play somewhere, but just in my head as the size of hail, that's the kind that hit my house, my panels this year.
I know, I touched the panels,
Yeah.
right? If you look at the screen right behind him, to my right are two panels, and they do feel very heavy duty.
Yeah, well, and it's, taking a direct hit from the sky from, like large hail, 90 degrees right into it, that could certainly fracture a panel. But what's key about how these arrays are designed and operated is we're able to stow based on and evaluate, okay, the storm's coming in, it's a hailstorm, the winds are this speed, we can either stow it this way to optimize for wind speed or this way to optimize for just glancing blows instead of direct blows from hail.
Okay.
So we have that ability on these projects and very good meteorological data to make those decisions on the fly to ensure that you're going to have the minimum impact.
And Doug, I tell you, I was just that question just popped into my head, and you answered it before I could ask it. So good job with that one. Now we're gonna cap this at 30 minutes, and then I got one more question for you. Then we'll stop this one and we'll start recording again. The last question I got for this part: the farming options on the land with solar panels. What options are there with agriculture and livestock?
Sure. At this point, we're proposing dual use with sheep grazing throughout the entire site. There could be some areas that for one reason or another might just be in pollinator habitat instead, but the idea is that it'll be sheep grazing, several thousand head of sheep out there doing targeted rotational grazing of the site. We'll keep exploring grain or specialty crops out there. First project doing that in Ohio, in Madison County, is now operational. So we'll see how that's much more experimental, but they're doing alfalfa and some grain inside the fence. And as that kind of proves itself, that's always an option too.
So this is definitely a newer field.
Grazing is not. Grazing on projects has probably been around five or more years throughout the U.S. and is pretty established now as really the best way to maintain these projects. Projects that are going forward now that are not proposing it are making a big mistake in terms of just how they're planning, because there's different planning involved in making sure your site is grazing or agrivoltaic ready.
Okay. All right, perfect, Doug. I'm going to go ahead and stop this, and we will record another one here in just a moment.
Sure.